It's a good morning to you. Welcome to Asake Online. My name is Zenzele Ndebele, and this is the Breakfast Club. Today, in our program, which is brought to you by Transparency International Zimbabwe, an organization that is promoting transparency and accountability, especially in government and private businesses. Today, we'll be talking about the issue of beneficial ownership. We want to know what is beneficial ownership and how is that affecting the ease or the transparency in doing business. We'll also be talking about the issue of parastatals and state enterprises. You know, every year when there is a new minister or there is a new minister of finance or new minister of this and that, we always hear government saying we are going to offload some of the parastatals that are not doing well. We are going to sell this, we are going to sell that. And that is not happening. But also, interestingly, you know, every year the Auditor General undertakes audits on state-owned companies and local authorities. And every year we get lots of reports about corruption, massive corruption that is happening in these state enterprises, and hardly do we see anyone being arrested or fired. We know of the scandals that have been happening at ZESA, Command Agriculture, NASA, CSC, and many other enterprises, and yet we don't see anything happening. I mean, the new Minister of Finance, no, he's no longer new, but when he came in 2018 to the movie, he talked about selling some of the state enterprises, and there was this vibe and talk about we're going to offload this, we're going to offload that. We know for a long time Zimbabwe has not been doing well. We've seen another company coming up, and all of a sudden we don't know what is happening. Right now Chinamasa is the chairperson of Zimbabwe. We don't know who are the other board members that are there. So there is always talk about state parastatals, and we know that a lot of things are not good or they're not happening, or there are a lot of good things that are really supposed to happen, but our state parastatals are in such a sorry state. So to help us discuss this issue, we have Dr. Gorden Moyo, who is the director of PRIS and also a former minister of state enterprises and parastatals during the government of national unity. He understands the parastatals better than most of us, and he's going to be talking to us about this principle of beneficial ownership. Babu Moyo, good morning.
Good morning, Zenzele, and good morning, everybody. Good morning, Zimbabwe.
Yeah, this concept of beneficial ownership is something that many people don't understand or we've never heard of. Can you briefly tell us what is beneficial ownership?
Thank you. Let me start by making a caveat to my analysis of beneficial ownership concept. Zimbabwe is currently engrossed in a morass of corruption, serious corruption, financial crime, money laundering, externalization of funds. It's rotten. Apart from poor leadership and the militarization of the state, the issue of corruption ranks amongst the top problems that this country is in. The concept of beneficial ownership is relatively new, not exactly new, but relatively new. It is one concept that comes in to try and mitigate the problem of corruption. By beneficial ownership, is meant who is the owner of a company, the real owner of a company, the real owner of an enterprise. Who is the power behind a business, behind a trust? Who is the beneficial, the actual, who is controlling? Many a times, people in power, people in government, the militations use proxies, use nominees, use fronts to create companies shell companies which are involved in money laundering, in financial crime, in externalization of resources of the country. This is what we mean by beneficial ownership, where the people are saying, declare, let's know the power behind, let's know the real owner, the controller, the influencer, the decision maker, who is benefiting and not the prox. Many a times you have got proxies. People who are running your fuel companies in Zimbabwe are not the real people who are beneficiaries. They are real people behind. All these companies that are involved in illicit financial flows, in illicit trade, illicit wildlife trade, are not the owners, are not the real beneficiaries. They are used, they are conveyor belts. That's in general the meaning of the concept beneficial ownership.
That makes it quite clear. I mean, because in Zimbabwe, you have so many companies that sometimes you really never hear the face behind. And some of these companies, you have never heard of them, but when you look at the records, they are moving millions of dollars. I mean, there's also this thing of, we always hear of so many ministers being involved in government, in businesses, their relatives. And in Zimbabwe, when you're, I mean, let's say you're being appointed a minister, are you obliged to declare, to say, I have a company that does this? And is there a law that actually, looks at how ministers behave when it comes to running businesses?
Generally speaking, there was no law and there is no law which says ministers in particular should declare what they own. But recently, the government passed a new law, the New Companies and Other Business Enterprises Act, which now says everybody should get all their companies registered with the registrar of companies, declare the beneficiaries, the real beneficiaries. And this is not specific to ministers. It's not specific to government officials, policymakers, members of parliament. This is a general law of the country. But the problem with this new law, which is seemingly good, is a good law in terms of international standards. A number of countries across the globe, Global North in particular, your United Kingdom has passed this law, which says, let's really know, declare in terms of the identities of the people behind the companies. But there is a problem with our own law. That information is not made public. Even if they declare with the registrar of companies, that information is not public. You cannot access it as journalists, as media, as civic society, as academics, as citizens. You cannot. It is only declared, you'd only deposit that information, that identity of the owners of companies to the Registrar General, unless you go to court to seek authorization of the court and the court order then can say, yes, you can have that access of the information. So it is it's a good law, but it has got loopholes. It is not helping at all.
So what you're simply saying is that right now I can't go to the registrar's company and say, may I please see who owns this company and who benefits from this company?
If you want, you can get the information, but companies, these people that we are talking about, nominate, they are what we call legal nominees who are already registered there. That information is public, but there is information, the actual ownership, the real beneficiaries, and you will not get it unless you go to court. And you must have a cause to convince the court to have the registrar of companies releasing the beneficial ownership names and details.
Yeah,
So
one of the things that Transparency International, really encourages or talks about a lot is corruption and transparency, and making sure that the citizens of Zimbabwe benefit from their resources. And with such issues where you have people who are fronting companies and they have the power to actually direct who gets the tender, how does this promote corruption?
Actually, we have an ecosystem of corruption that involves shelf companies and policymakers, cabinet ministers, policymakers, and the powerful military officials and military hierarchy. These people would make decisions through cabinet because they are not known to be owners of fuel companies. They are not known to be owners of agricultural organizations. They are not known to be owners of mining concessions. They have fronted some people. They then make decisions. For example, you make a decision that the government of Zimbabwe through ZMDC is going to go into partnership with a company from China. You make that decision in cabinet. And you make a decision as if you are not involved because your name is not in the documents, it's not in the company, it's not in the contracts, but you are the power behind it. So you make a decision that is going to make you earn a lot of profiteer out of that. So a number of organizations, business organizations, enterprises in this country, you've got senior military officials, senior government officials, including heads of states are involved. Fronting people, then they make decisions in such a way that the companies get contracts where they are involved. Their own companies get contracts, go into joint ventures, get a lot of money, and the Zimbabweans will not know. The resources are then extracted from the country going to these individuals. And because they are not known, then there is money laundering. There is illicit financial flows out of the country. So this country is sitting on a serious corruption web instigated by those that are supposed to be dealing with that corruption. I think Zimbabweans should be asking themselves some questions. How come the whole government would say we are going to deal with the corruption? We declare a war against corruption, zero tolerance against corruption. But you see corruption continuing. It's because they are the beneficiaries. And again, some people are arrested and they are released, catch and release. It's because those people will be working on behalf of government ministers, government officials, cabinet, and other militations, as I call them. So they have to be released because they'll be working on behalf of these guys who are not known. Therefore, the concept beneficial ownership declaration, beneficial ownership transparency policies. If government yet a policy, this new law, this new company's law, yet allowed the registry, the registries to be public, then Zimbabweans will know. Journalists will investigate. Journalists will publicize. But because they want to hide, they are involved. They want to hide. Then they put this provision that no, you can only get the information through a court order.
Minister Moyo, during the, you were a minister during the GNU, and at one point you were a minister of state enterprises and parastatals. I mean, every year and almost for, I don't know how many years now, we've had government talking about reforming parastatals, selling those that are not performing, but nothing is happening. How many parastatals do we have, if you still have an idea?
We have over 100 parastatals in this country. When I was there, we had around 70, 78, 79, but a number of them have since been established after my exit. So there are many of them. And your question is, how come every year we hear this refrain, we hear this song, which is like a broken song now? We are going to commercialize, we are going to privatize, we are going to restructure, and nothing happens. There are three reasons why it is difficult for government to undertake reforms in parastatals. The first one is that the parastatals are actually home for military generals who retire. After retirement, you don't want your military officials somewhere. As a government, you wanted them to be controlled somewhere. So government deploys retired military hierarchies and parastatals as board members and as chief executives, and they control. And that allows them to continue to have access to state resources. And they are kept going through state resources that are found through parastatals. The second thing is parastatals are not parastatals, they are party-statals, if I may say. ZANU-PF gets its resources, financial and material resources, through parastatals. I think people of Zimbabwe will know that each time there was a rally, you would saw Zupco going around carrying people to rallies. That's part of a patronage system, a part of gaining from state resources. That will be state resource used to finance a party function. And again, this is where a lot of joint ventures are structured by ZANU-PF, and these joint ventures benefit the government officials. So they are not looking for proper companies to come into Zimbabwe. They are looking for those that can be involved in profiteering, in shady deals. So if you are to put on the table Air Zimbabwe, put on the table NRZ, put on the table CSC, and say you want real investors will be available, but you then want to get those that are going to give you some resources behind the table, under the table. That's where we are finding so corruption is the issue here. Until we deal with the systemic and structural corruption in Zimbabwe, our state-owned enterprises will continue to be a burden to the fiscus and to the people of Zimbabwe.
Yeah, you mentioned this, also quite interesting points, but your last point, you're saying the problem that we have in Zimbabwe is systemic and structural corruption. How do we deal with that?
That's the biggest problem. A systemic problem is embedded in the structures of and in the institutions of a country. And the main institution here becomes government. And by government, let me use substitutionalism, the cabinet. And by cabinet, let me use substitutionalism, the president. The president, he has got a responsibility to deal with systemic and structural problems, because he has the power, he has the resource, he has the constitution, armed with the constitution. armed with the system, armed with the bureaucracy, armed with everything to deal with that. We are seeing Rwanda, for example, Rwanda, where Paul Kagame and is changing Rwanda to, Rwanda is becoming a Singapore of Africa, a Switzerland of Africa, and is dealing with the corruption. I am not saying Rwanda is roses. Of course, there is development without democracy in Rwanda, but I'm talking about corruption here, where the head of the state is committed. There is political will. He is marshalling all the resources, the financial, material, military, political, diplomatic resources, everything. So it is the leadership at the head level, at the head of government level, that can deal with systematic systemic and structural corruption. There was an opportunity immediately after the coup in November 2017. Zimbabweans were ready to comply. There was a global consensus, a national consensus, that perhaps this is time for transformation, for social change, political change, political transformation. And Zimbabweans were ready. And when the police officers were out of the roads, Zimbabweans were waiting for the government to give a signal and to show commitment. But that commitment did not come, simply because their hands are dirty. The people who took over power have got their own hands dipped into the national till for too long. Hence, they are unable to remove their hands from there. They have become part of the problem. They are structural part of the problem. And until we have a change of government, we need a change of government, or a mindset change in government, then we can deal with the systemic problems.
Yeah, so you have mentioned two issues: the change of government and the mindset of change in government, and also what when you are talking about corruption in the parastatals and how the parastatals are really working. You mentioned three interested parties, or three parties. There is the military establishment, there is the party, and there is the state, and these things seem to be intertwined as if they are one. Do we have separation of powers when it comes to these three entities?
I think Zimbabweans would appreciate that, particularly post-2017. It has always been there, but specifically post-2017, the Mnangagwa administration adopted the Beijing model of running a country, where the Politburo is the supreme organ of the state, and not of the part, but of the state. We have the Politburo making decisions ahead of cabinet. Each day there is a cabinet. If the cabinet is on Tuesday or Wednesday, on Monday, Politburo, not the entire Politburo. There is the G7, the senior members of Politburo, about 7 of them, chaired by the president. This is where your Chinamasa is. This is where your Obedkov is, and others. They make decisions. When the president is going to cabinet, he goes to cabinet with the decisions of the party, and cabinet becomes a rubber stamping kind of an entity. And your parliament, because it is dominated by the ruling party, becomes a public relations entity of the state. So there is this conflation of the party, the state, and the military, because Zimbabwe is run by an executive military alliance. You can't do anything in Zimbabwe without the military now since November 2017, but even before, but we are seeing it now glaringly after November 2017. And these are the people who are running the state, these are the people who are running the party, these are the people who are running cabinet, these are the people who are running parliament. So there is this pervasive presence of the party in all sectors of our economy. The footprints of ZANU-PF, the military, in the crevices of all the state institutions in the country is so glaring.
You really print such a a terrible picture of our situation. And as we conclude, my question is: I know I have asked you this in a way, and you were talking about reform. What's the way for Zimbabwe? What's the way out of this mess, if there's any?
This problem is solvable. I'm an optimistic person. I think Zimbabwe is able to deal with this crisis. The crisis currently we have, whether in government, in politics, in the economy, everywhere, is a dialogue. There is a need for an inclusive dialogue. Zimbabweans must dialogue. There is no sin in dialogue. If we come together as Zimbabweans and agree on the pillars of transformation and change, social and economic, and agree on the way forward, with the mindset, a change of mindset, a mindset which says we want to build our country, and then we will solve these problems. And this should not be a political dialogue that I'm talking about, not just political. We need an inclusive dialogue. Yes, politicians play a major role because ultimately they become the policy makers. But in the process of coming up with a solution, really Mnangagwa should ensure that there is an inclusive, not just Poland. We need something above Poland. We need post-Poland dialogue.
Yeah, I mean, there's some people who have talked about, the issue of dialogue, and we have seen South Africans also, coming in to try and sound up. Do you think we are headed for another GNU?
I'm not concerned personally, at personal level. I'm not concerned about the architecture of the kind of government that results. I'm concerned about the process that produces that government. You can have a GNU tomorrow if Mnangagwa meets Chamisa and they discuss and Tozani Kope and they discuss, they can have a GNU tomorrow. But that GNU may not resolve our problems. We have history here. I was part of that history in between 2009 and 2013. We did everything that we tried. I tried to reform the parastatals. I brought the corporate governance framework. I designed a number of policies, and the cabinet would say, yes, this is correct, but there was no implementation. There was no political will. They would not implement, they would simply look at it and say, this is the opposition thing. So what we need is a process that is all inclusive, a process that has got buy-in from all Zimbabweans, that is going to produce an agreement, a consensus, and that consensus to be implemented consensually. That's what we need.
Dr. Moyo, thank you very much for this eye-opening discussion. This was a program which was brought to us by Transparency International Zimbabwe, and we were talking about the issue of beneficial ownership, especially looking at the parastatals, the corruption that is happening, the reason why Zimbabwe, with so many promising parastatals, has really failed to reform these parastatals and get a lot of money out of it. Parastatals alone in Zimbabwe can actually change the direction of our economy. They've been employing a lot of people in the past. If you talk about CSC, NRZ, and many others, and most of these parastatals are just now, what remains is just a shell. And yet every day we hear about the reform, we hear new ministers talking about selling them, getting investments. I mean, in 1980, Zimbabwe was one of the biggest airlines. I think it had over 22 airplanes. And today we are left with one. So, most of the airlines who had less than one aeroplane at that time have grown to be international airlines. I mean, look at Kenyan Airways, Ethiopian Airways, and the airlines in the Middle East. They've grown over the last 30 years, while ours have been collapsing. So there's a lot of things that are not going right, and sometimes you can tell that there's no political will to reform. And that was Dr. Gorden Moyo actually talking to us about these issues and the challenges that we face as Zimbabweans. And he says, we just need to reform. And we need that will from government, from the head of state, to then say, we are not going to have any issues to do with corruption. We are not going to tolerate any corruption, and really get to the ground and walk the talk. So we hope one day Zimbabweans will find each other and solve these problems that we have been talking about for the last 40 years. My name is Zenzele Ndebele. Till we meet again in other programs, have a good day.